Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the collaboration album from Sufjan Stevens, Bryce Dessner, James McAlister, and Nico Muhly called Planetarium. I don't even know where to start with this one. When I first saw that this album had not only been requested so early, but had received by far the most votes on my schedule thanks to Patreon, I was kind of blown away. Not for Katy Perry, not for Rise Against, not for SZA, this. But hey, I was curious too. These sorts of supergroup collaborations, they do not come around every day. So some background here, because you're gonna need it. Apparently, this started off as a commissioned orchestra piece that was originally performed live back in 2012, but never properly recorded on wax. So Sufjan Stevens rounded up a murderous row of talent to take this score into fresh territory. And we got some heavyweights here. Sufjan Stevens, you know him. He's a powerhouse in his own right. But when you add in the guitarist of the National, Bryce Dessner, classical composer Nico Muhly, and drummer James McAlister, you've got a pretty stacked lineup of talent. And considering these are all songs written about space and our solar system, okay, look, we don't get enough good music celebrating space. I'll just say that right now. Now, on the one hand, I was really excited to dig into this, but I also know that this could very well play to that Lights in Motion record, Dear Avalanche, that I covered months ago. A potent piece of music that can feel, well, a little unengaging or abstract to the point of frustration. But still, I was fascinated by what this quartet could do with this sort of material. It's too odd and distinctive a concept to really ignore here, so what did we get with Planetarium? Well, honestly, this is a tricky record to evaluate, mostly because it's very hard to evaluate whether it's succeeded in what it's trying to do. Actually, that's not even quite the case, because if you take a look at what Sufjan Stevens is writing here on this album, you can easily make the statement that for what this piece is, it succeeded in a way. Because Planetarium is an odd project, and one that I'm not sure completely works as an album on its own, especially when you factor in the writing that Stevens is providing it, falling somewhere between an abstract theater piece and the backing orchestral post-rock that you occasionally hear in one of the better budgeted science centers and museums that you visit in a major city with general disinterest on vacation. Less because you're more expecting to learn anything new, and more because you're curious how those tour guides are just gonna bungle a whole explanation for some of the science that you already know. Okay, maybe that's just me here, but it definitely feels like, I don't know, a commissioned piece. That's for damn sure. The sort of art where a wealthy benefactor chose some very big high concept idea to challenge and troll the artist, who then turns around to deliver something that'll leave both the people who do and don't understand it a little exasperated altogether. And nowhere is this more apparent than in a lot of the writing, so let's start with that. See, given my and Sufjan Stevens' literary background, I was expecting the callbacks to Greek and Roman myth and the gods that gave the planets their major names. A pretty obvious progression, I would expect that. What I didn't expect was that Stevens' willingness to plunge into the more lurid details of these myths, which can feel a little bit weird when juxtaposed against much of this instrumentation, or hell, even against his voice and delivery. I get that it might seem impossible to write human drama out of the cold facts of the science of our solar system, but Sufjan Stevens goes beyond that into retelling parts of the Venus and Aphrodite myth with the very much his own sexual awakening at summer camp, and then follows it up with Uranus, where the most prevalent symbol is the god's castration, because yes, that did happen in the myth. And it gets stranger from there. The twin bloody tales pulling from Aboriginal and Aztec folklore on Moon, the cannibalism on Saturn, the god of war who wants peace at any cost on Mars, which has a startling amount in common with the recent Wonder Woman movie in tone and subtext of all things. It's just a bizarre choice, and one that I'm not sure flatters anyone or anything here. Now, of course, if we want to go even deeper than that, Sufjan Stevens is also injecting a hearty mix of modern Christian iconography on songs like Saturn, where he nakedly draws parallels between cannibalism and the Eucharist, which is drawing a weird parallel between two sets of abstract symbols and trying to make them more literal, trying to stretch a point there, and I don't really think the underlying moralism makes a lot of sense. I mean, the 15-minute long piece Earth gets close to some sort of explanation, as humanity calls upon God to explain the nature of their existence on that rock, and then at the end of their lives, people recognize the grand majesty of that world around them and find some form of an answer, but thematically, it doesn't really fit the Greco-Roman iconography of the other songs. The two tracks I actually think are the most clearly articulated are Mercury and Pluto, mostly because they feel the most connected to their respective gods and their mythos. But can somebody explain to me why Mercury is tacked onto the end of this project, unless it's trying to imply through subtext that we still don't really know all the answers in the cosmos? But even then, the language is coached through more romantic relationship imagery that is all over this album and still feels kind of weird with a lot of the subject matter, both gods and planets. And that only highlights a bigger issue. The sequencing of this record is a mess. I was willing to accept that we weren't getting traditional song structures and that the narrative of this piece would feel more abstract almost by necessity. You kind of expect that when you're making a musical about the solar system. But in that case, the flow and the sequencing between distinct pieces becomes all the more important, and I can't help but feel that it's just not clicking here. The planets are approached in an order that's barely connected, doesn't even make a lot of sense. We get interludes surrounding cosmic phenomena like black holes and Halley's Comet and the tides, and when you couple it with the sparse extended instrumental pieces and all these songs that they feel underwritten for a record that's nearly 80 minutes long, it leads to a feeling of, well, a lot of dead air, which, yes, it might be loosely representative of deep space, but doesn't actually lead to a progression that allows moments of crescendo or instrumental climax to hit with any sort of raw power for me. Part of this is the feel that Sufjan Stevens just might not be the right singer for this material, especially when he dips into an increasingly frail falsetto, when the mixed balance and the production feels so loud and heavily regimented, especially in the percussion. He feels increasingly disconnected and distant, not able to bring his intimacy to the forefront. And no, piling on layers of robotic or vocoder effects does not help. Now granted, there are songs where they add some thicker choral effects to pretty solid effect. Uranus is probably the best example, with the horns coming off the bubbling, deeper beat and the glittery guitar line. Although Earth does come close despite having to get through nearly 6 minutes of blurred over orchestral arrangement and auto-tune in order to get there. And yet this leads to another issue. Again, I'm accepting that we aren't getting traditional song structures, but you need to at least have melodic motifs or elements that make specific parts of the movements more stand out, and that can be very hit and miss here. Jupiter brings in much heavier live drums before a warping string segment, grinding vocal filters, and heavily gated mechanical percussion, which, believe it or not, actually kind of works for me. It's a little bit better than the shuddering main beat on Venus, or the weird flattened gloss of Moon with the pipes that sounds like a below average Visible Cloaks instrumental and just did not really work for me. But there's a really slick melodic guitar line on Pluto that breaks into these operatic string section. The rapid flutter on Saturn is a desperate and well appreciated shot of momentum that this album could have used in its midsection with the 3 instrumental pieces back to back. And I really dug the piano and guitar that played into the ballads of Neptune and Mercury that opened up and closed the album. They're really quite beautiful pieces. But I would argue that it's Mars that pinpointed my biggest issue with this project. Yeah, there's a lot of glitch around a lot of the vocals, but I kept waiting for the muscle and grit behind a song emblematic of a god of war, even if he's not fighting, and I didn't get it. And that's when it really hit me. This is a record that, if it's not about space, it's about gods, and yet the moments where it feels cosmic and huge and impressive or alien just aren't here. Part of this, yes, it's the sequencing, sure. I think a larger percussion section, or maybe horns, or maybe a heavier guitar might have helped, but if you're expecting heavier synth or guitar, or even a consistent crescendo driven on horns and strings, you don't often get it. Or if you do, it'll just ebb away into movements that don't really have unique or alien character or identity, or certainly don't match how lurid some of the writing is gonna get. I'm not expecting every space-related project to sound like Arion, but it's not like the movements aren't here, just rarely expanded to fill up the extended runtime that contains a lot of atmospheric but pretty unremarkable post-rock that I would have heard already. Hell, I've heard albums from The National containing guitar work with more muscle than what Bryce Dessner delivers here. And when you're writing about the expanse of the cosmos with frequent connections to the bloody exploits of the Greek and Roman gods, and you can't give it more instrumental weight? Seriously? Oh, look. I know this is coming across as probably more negative than it should, but that's because this is a profoundly frustrating and odd listen, and I gave it a lot, probably too many listens, partially because it does make sense to me. It's not really so oblique or confusing in its thematic arc that it can't resonate. It's just that between the listless arrangements, the baffling contradictions in the execution between the instrumentation, the production, the vocals, the lyrics, and the grand moments that just feel kind of abortive and don't pay off the way they should, I'm left thinking that either something just got lost in translation from live orchestra to record, or that this was never destined to work that much at all. As such, for me, it's a 6 out of 10, but I do recommend that everybody hear it. This is one of those projects that feels so damn unique that it definitely drew my attention, but after every listen makes it abundantly clear that it should remain as a side project. I don't really need to hear a sequel. If you haven't heard it already live in the course of when it was performed a couple years back, it is worth a listen, but if everything I described sounds out of your element, it very much is. Take that as you will. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I really have no idea how many of you guys are going to watch this particular review because it is a weird record, but hey, if you're curious, if you want to buy it, links in the description below. And I got the poll up there. I know some people are calling this album of the year. I want you to explain why, so comments, poll, have fun. Beyond anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, you guys can see the Katy Perry and Rise Against albums move up the schedule. Link to Patreon is right there. 3 times a week you guys get to vote, and once a week the higher tier contributors get to add records or movies to my schedule. More details right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.